Please join me in welcoming Sharon.
A special invitation for me today to be among you who are thinking about new patterns of communion, how you're thinking about being more connected and creating a more ethical, humane built environment. I didn't know you existed, so I'm so happy to know that. Not just you here, but 700 more that I'm really eager to hear a response from, because Design for Freedom should really be thought of as accelerating during this. You're thinking about post-pandemic, the future of the post-pandemic world. And at this point in time, it is so promising because the understanding of how we are connected in the world, supply chains, when did we ever know what the price of a cargo shipment container was? All of a sudden we do. We know how the flows of material are happening around the world. That never happened. Right now, we actually understand that the global supply chain is something that we need to understand. So we're going to talk about tea. I understand you had some tea conversations earlier. Tea will even come into play. Surprisingly, didn't know that would happen. And before I get started, I want to just, because I know you've had dinner, make sure you're awake for the tough stuff to come. But I'm going to start with the video. So that is the message, that we are reimagining architecture as this driver for humanitarian outcomes. And here's Grace Farms. You can see we're embedded in nature. The idea, too, for Grace Farms germinated from a concept from an architect friend of mine who said space communicates. And so what could space do? What could space do in terms of embedding values into space? Could it break down barriers between people and sectors? Could it be a hopeful space as we address pressing humanitarian issues? Our stake in the ground was to end modern slavery and gender-based violence, to be able to address gender and racial equity, and to be just a place to be, and have this reflectivity. So you can see here that there's we're embedded in nature, so there's multi-opportunities to engage. There's an opportunity just to experience nature, to encounter the arts. This is Teresita Fernandez's piece, Double Glass River, pursue justice, and to also foster community, this in the commons, and to explore faith. So that's a commonality I believe we might have in this group in terms of being able to advance good together, and also to be a place where we have dialogue about what is the shape of a flourishing life. And certainly had not expected when we were building Grace Farms that there was an opportunity that for us to be able to have an underpinning of which is new outcomes, which is also a big part of what I espouse, that we have this place where it can germinate new outcomes, that the outcome would actually be about the materials that we used in our own building after we built. So there'll be two outcomes that I'll talk about. One is Grace Farms Foods, slightly because it supports Design for Freedom, and Design for Freedom is one of these new outcomes that was unexpected. You can imagine that this whole movement to create this radical paradigm shift or remove forced and child labor from the building material supply chain is something that could have only happened by being in a space that is porous, that did bring together architecture and justice. We had the UN at Grace Farms, where we were learning more and digging deep into forced labor. We produced a report that went up to the Security Council and was a big part of the resolution 2331. So those conversations started to percolate, and it was able to start connecting these dots. So what we're thinking about now about Design for Freedom as the next step in architecture justice is that we must include social equity and ethical material transparency. So we're not creating a separate lane for Design for Freedom. Rather, we are looking to work in parallel to the provenance of materials that we're investigating in terms of understanding the embodied carbon, the provenance. We're going to be now adding labor inputs, fair labor inputs to that. So into the processes, the platforms, and the work that we're all doing. That's the aspiration. So the question that brought people around the table, leaders of industry, those that worked on Grace Farms, those that we had just in the first few years of opening, Grace Farms had been in contact with and had a similar ethical mindset. The question that brought us around the table is your building ethically sourced, forced labor free, as well as sustainably designed? And the answer is, we don't know, because the entire construction sector has been given a labor transparency pass, which is remarkable. So you think about that, there's no inspection, there's no accountability. And that's where we are. But not so fast, because the movement is beginning, and you'll see how it is starting to have traction and how this moment does matter. So you can see where Grace Farms is embedded in nature. I was there on the job site during construction, made sure that there was fair labor. So we had, so here we are, we're on the job site. I did love it, so I threw that in there. I just love construction. I don't know what aspect you're all in, but I want you in this whole discussion is for you to think about, from your vantage point, the agency you have to accelerate the movement. But it's important actually to know that, okay, this roof is not just a singular structure. There's many components to that roof. And we actually did a forensics on the roof to determine how far back we could go later, because the epiphany only happened after we built, is, where did those structures come from? And we could only go back a certain, like one tier, but those that Zahner was the one who produced and worked to fabricate our roof. They said, if you'd asked us earlier, if you asked, we could have actually traced more. So big thing to understand is we need to ask the questions, and even asking those questions of our suppliers, our agents, and those on the construction site, the procurement officers. Ask the questions, and you'll find that you might have more more uptake than you might expect. So also something that's very important to think about is that we are thinking about the labor on site, but we're talking about the other half of the equation. That's just a whole different mindset that we haven't been thinking about: material procurement. Here's just the materials that were just the mammoth amount of materials, and you could really feel that and being on the site every week. I could see that. Construction is not only the largest contributor to climate change, but it's also at the highest risk of forced and child labor. And there is an intersection point that we're working on with the Yale Center for Ecosystems and Architecture. There's new studies coming out. We're working together with Anna Dyson there, who runs it, thinking about that intersection point, because there is one. And there was no list of materials, so we started to put that together. There's just an understanding of, what is modern slavery, just to make it pretty succinct. It's when we refer to situations of exploitation that a person cannot refuse or leave because of threats, violence, coercion, deception, or abuses of power. There is a new study that just came out, the Global Slavery Index 2023, literally last week, from Walk Free. And this is the first time you have seen, in a number of years, solar panels on the cover. We have been talking about solar panels, knowing that the polysilicon is been at least 85% is produced in China, 45 to 50 in the Uyghur region, and really had a clarion call to start to trace the materials that are used in our solar panels. And it wasn't until now, though, that it's really started to come to the fore. And you'll see why when we talk about the laws. So right now, you would think that with these additional laws that have been put in place since the Modern Slavery Acts in 2015, we'll talk about some of the trade regulations that would come into play. You'd think that maybe the forced labor would start to be reduced. It's actually accelerated in the last 4 years to 28 million people that are trapped in forced labor today. So it is the onus of all of us to know whether or not the materials we're using are indeed made with forced labor. Then. So we talked about, all of us having agency. You might all be architects or other engineers, right? So tell me, is there a range to professors and so forth, right? So from the very get-go, the idea is to bring leaders who can make quick decisions within this full ecosystem. You can see the pressure points are in blue. And we had as owners and developers, I could have mandated a certain percentage of materials right off the bat to have documentation. We cannot ask for an entire project today immediately to be forced labor free. It's just not possible. But it is possible to start today with a number of materials. So that is what we're proposing. And you can still put it into our contracts, and we can see as far back as we can go. We can ask for it, but the actual delivery of it is with thousands of materials it's really not possible. So, but we can get going. And the other pressure point is on contracts and laws with the governments. We're going to have a supplier, symposium pretty soon with the suppliers and government working together. We were the first to go to the government back in 2018 from the construction sector to ask about the laws that are being put in place. So we still have a long ways to go. You can see specifications, and procurement officers, certainly, and the public. Grace Farms is a public place, free and open to the public, and we're starting and hoping to initialize public demand. As architects, I think that this might be something that really would speak to you. Jing Liu and Florian of Soil are part of our working group, as is Michael. But one thing I think that makes it pretty clear, because at the get-go, architects might say, I'm just specifying, I'm not the procurement officer. And yet, so what they would say, and hope you agree, is that so if every line we draw affects a string of material practices with an ecological impact, it also affects a series of labor practices that impact human rights. Our designs define the labor needed to extract the material from the earth, the labor to clean it, process it, assemble it, transport it, and to build it on a construction site. So the power is also in having the full ecosystem working together, competitors, and you can see here too, and really institutions that can also be able themselves to make sure that they can also have influence over suppliers, and to ask for documentation of fair labor inputs and to work together on project teams. That's what's so exciting and promising about the construction sector. Different than others is that it's the sheer magnitude and scale of a project and those on it. There's a lot of, is certainly promise in working together at this scale. And Design for Freedom University partners, so important. We've been able to guest lecture in at least 24 universities that span both architecture, engineering, business, and the participation among them is all varied, but we have also initialized the first classes on ethical material sourcing and investigation at Yale, and that also spanned into a combination class, and a little bit different in terms of the historical dependence on forced labor in the architecture sector with University of Michigan. And then we also, this last year, the Illinois Institute of Technology has also on board with the University of Illinois, and that has been exciting, exactly on ethical material sourcing. And there's some exciting things going to be happening soon with you, Michael. So we really believe that the next generation is the one who is going to think about these sustainable solutions, and the underpinning absolutely needs to be considered in terms of the human cost, and where we are buying and who we're buying our materials from. So the global laws that already are in existence do forbid the use of slave labor in the built environment, yet our buildings and the materials that go into our buildings are heavily reliant on slave labor, unfortunately. And so these are laws I was referring to that started actually with the California Supply Chain Act in 2010, and then the Modern Day Slavery Acts also started to expand into the UK, around the world, Australia, where you are too, who's also here earlier with actually it's New Zealand, but they're considering one as well. And the new ones that have just been adopted and passed are in Germany and Canada. The two that are in orange are the US trade regulations that have teeth, the Trade Facilitation Enforcement Act and then also the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act that you might have heard of that has just been implemented. And in the case, the difference between the two is the Trade Facilitation Enforcement Act closed a loophole of the Tariff Act, and it also prohibits any goods made with forced labor from entry into the United States. So if you're inspected, a container is inspected, you'd have to produce that documentation. The Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act is a little different in that there is no entry of any goods made within the Uyghur region or coming through the Uyghur region. And so you are actually have to produce it regardless of being, of it being inquired about that. So the share of total global production originating in the region there is, you can see, quite heavily reliant. There's polysilicon, like I said, 45% for solar panels, PVC, aluminum, cotton, and many other products also are made in that region and are being held up at the border right now. So not only are these laws part of for forced labor, but they're also included in illegally logged timber. There's timber laws that there's 5 different countries that have them as well. And illegally logged timber is quite often harvested with forced labor. So there's a tie there. Right now we have about $1.4 billion worth of shipments at the border. And now let's go from not only laws, but to the AIA Code of Ethics. So the AIA in the United States, now you're working around the world, but the members of the AIA are to uphold the law and the conduct of their professional activities and have a materials pledge that Design for Freedom is a part of underneath the equity provision there. So you can see that that we've been working with them and put that into the social equity, health and equity area. So there's another area that is very important. This is actually, again, slavery's been used for millennia as a means to build cities, to be able to forego the, really being humanely considering others in pursuit of profit. So the question is, are owners subsidizing their ROIs with slavery? Or another way of saying is, are we accepting the slavery discount? This is a question that comes up because people ask me, well, if we start to ethically pursue if we're going to ethically, if we would start to pursue fair labor inputs, is that now going to cost more for the project? Thinking there's a bit of a muscle memory with the green building movement, is it going to cost more? Well, we need to turn that around and say we can no longer accept the slavery discount because right now, when you think about it, the pricing with fair labor is the fair market value. So there's think about it, here's where, if we're paying a price here and the price is with fair labor here, we're just accepting the slavery discount. And that's not okay. We need to reverse the whole thinking. So the other thing that's important is that there's other risks involved, not just financial, legal, and reputation. Those risks are there, but we also, on the opposite side of that, have opportunity. So the opportunity, what we're talking about here today, is to create a more humane built environment and to also have an increased environmental protection, because the more governments, you're going to be able to also protect the environment. And we're also going to increase innovation because we're not dependent on cheap materials, where there's going to be a lack of commercial viability due to R&D dollars not really not flowing in for those new developments. So what are the riskiest products? There was no list. So we put together a list, and there's a report you can find online that was issued in 2020. And these are the materials that range in no particular order, but do at the top, there's composites and raw materials, and they are high risk between the range of rubber, glass, fiber, textiles, steel, electronics, bricks, timber, stone, copper, iron, minerals, and precursors. So that's about everything that goes into our buildings, right? And there's more. So the one thing that is important to note is that there is already history for some of these materials to be plagued with exploitation. Rubber is one of them. And on the other end, what's a little more promising is that there has been a recognition, not only in the beginning of our first food, then clothing was called to be accountable, and next will be shelter. So we can start to adopt the ethical textile sourcing requirements and progress that's been made in the apparel industry and incorporate those into interior design projects. I feel like that is really one of the more promising areas for adoption within the industry for the public, because everyone buys a chair or a curtain, they may not buy, they're most often not going to build a building, but we will buy some of these interiors and have that agency to fuel fair labor inputs. The other thing that is important to note is that most products might now have product-specific certifications with third-party audits that you'll know about, that's in our toolkit, that do address labor. However, there's some products like bricks. There's one very limited certification in Nepal, but also glass just doesn't have one yet that does include fair labor assessments. So how do we go about this? And just last year, as you described, our toolkit was issued, and this is a tool you can start using right away. That are being adopted and used on projects. The ones you saw in pilot projects and firms around the world are starting to use it. It is the beginning, and this toolkit does identify it does have a commitment opportunity for those, so you can understand who's a part of the movement and just to understand the principles and the overview. The education component goes deeper into all those 12 materials and a little more, and also has a questionnaire and sample specification. So as an example, taking each one of these materials, what we have done is take relevant certifications that do include labor, fair labor inputs, and therefore, when you are, in this case, you're investing in FSC certified wood per se. And you can also now have a double benefit knowing in the last couple of years, there's a core labor requirement. So we put into Grace Farms, with Structure Lam, they were FSC certified glue lam beams, and they certainly reduce the risk because more oversight and there's a chain of custody. But now when you do the same and that investment's made, you have a double benefit. And you can see there's a long way to go, but we're also identifying hotspots, the nations that are at risk generally. And in terms of timber at Grace Farms, in terms of trying to be sustainable, and in that effort, we use wood that was felled on site for the tables in commons. And what was really exciting to learn later, of course, is that when you use material circularity, local materials, you have the oversight for materials from on site, you are contributing to lower risk within the full supply chain. And also we reused existing barns. It's an former equestrian facility, so we reused these barns. So that's another avenue to truncate the supply chain and to reduce risk. Copper. I mean, it's one of there's an interesting fact now. I think that there's at least half of the copper is used in the building environment, and there's more copper, and I'm going to look into this a little more because my mass design engineer, we were talking about this, might be above ground than below. That's been, or at least they have 500 mines right now. There's probably more, but there's a lot of this copper is already now above ground. And a new copper mark has also been just issued. Has become a part of the investigation process. So here, you also note that there's a limited supply of copper used not only in our building materials, so they also are near biodiversity conservation areas, as well as indigenous peoples' land, and that will also, again, be a social inequity that will happen if we are not understanding where our supply is coming from. And the copper mark does have the third-party audited supply chain, and there's more to go over there. Now, steel, just so I can get to so you can have an opportunity for conversation. Steel and iron, similar thing. You can go through the toolkit and see all this, but The solar panels themselves, big problem. You can see not just polysilicon that's part of the issue, but copper, aluminum, silver, steel, and glass. You can look at these components and understand that our sustainable solutions cannot be underpinned by exploitation. And the polyvinyl chloride too. There's a report that just was issued, built on repression. It's a very important new one that comes out. And the thing that's important here to note is that the external savings and discount for PVC resin made in the Uyghur region is only worth a mere $100. So when we start to determine what that slavery discount is, which is next, as you as professors, this is an area that we could use a lot of help in to determine what that is. Relevant certifications are in there, additional resources, a lot more information you might think, so we pulled that all together. And specifications was the D1 specifications that helped to be put together and in the toolkit with Bill Dubois, who's at Gensler, who's their construction specifier, and our team on this, so that's really great. And then there's a simple material tracking schedule, and then helps you just to take a few materials, get started. And then technology partners are going to be a big part of this, because with the volume and the number of tiers that go into each one of our materials is voluminous, and the AI capacity to identify where there are infractions is really promising. So we're working with a number, and also platforms that like Mindful Materials that are putting together other avenues for transparency, are including Design for Freedom. And the summit we were talking about, the thing that was really important to note is that our first one last year was, who opened with me was Prince Zaid Rad Al Hussein, who was a former High Commissioner on Human Rights until 2018. He had not known about and not thought about the construction supply chain, and said he would do things differently. And what he said is, all good revolutions begin like this. So this is you. This is why you're all together, I know too, in the pursuit of a more humane built environment, and to be able to really amplify human dignity. And I think that's really, yes, it's super, super exciting. And so at the summit, we did have 60 students, because I know a lot of you are professors, so I'll land on this for a second. But how great is that? 23 universities were represented, 60 students, and this is where the future will help. I mean, they'll help us in creating our sustainable futures that are considering the human cost as well. We've also had press, so the word is out with Dazine, who's also, is an international publication along with the Architectural Record and Arch Daily, covered the summit and very succinctly noted in a headline, we can no longer accept the slavery discount. So this is where we are. This is really important. And we've had ethical action meetings in Mumbai and London, and we're going to have a permanent Design for Freedom exhibit at Grace Farms. That'll be coming up in the first quarter with Nina Cook-John, and our tea and coffee. So the tea and coffee will also we're a B Corp certified brand now, and we are the first U.S. tea brand to partner with Fair Trade International, and the only premium coffee and tea brand to give back 100%, which will go to Design for Freedom. And we also, just so you know, it helps people understand and have a conversation over tea, like we have at Grace Farms, and also in corporations. We have a new system for that, but our coffee is made exclusively with women-led co-ops. So you can, again, just ask for what we want to see, and what it just happened really is about asking for it. And that's how things can start to germinate. And then I was here last year in the Darjeeling area of India. I know you learned a lot about tea today, so if you have questions about that, we'll talk about it. And we have a tea expert, Frank Quay. They're actually going to India today for the second visit. And to wrap it up, this is our non-negotiable challenge, that every building should be designed and built for freedom. And freedom does come with a cost. You have to take time like yourselves. You have to invest. And in doing that, I appreciate you doing that yourselves. And once you know, you cannot unknow it. And I'm sorry, this is it. You're here. And now we all have a duty to act. And I can't wait to hear what you think in terms of your capacity. That's it. Mm-hmm.